Welcome to the presentation feedback on Summer 2022 Components 1 and 2. This is a pre-recorded pack and is designed for teachers to receive feedback on our Pearson Physical Education specification. These two exams were sat for the first time in 2018 and again in 2019. However, due to changes in examinations in 2020 and 2021 due to COVID-19, this is the first time this exam has been sat live since. So there are chances for you to gain feedback on national performance of candidates, to consider the variation of how candidates performed on different questions and explore the possible reasons why, and to address any frequently asked questions and common issues. This summer also saw the use of advanced information for candidates to prepare for examinations. This event is designed for you to be able to receive feedback on national in components 1 and 2 from summer 2022, to consider the variation of candidates' performance on different questions and possible reasons why, and a look at guidance and support on extended answer questions, as well as the examiner's reports. The agenda today will look at grade boundaries and cumulative percentages for summer 2022, papers 1 and 2. There will be a deep dive on paper 1, looking at the questions and advice on the extended answer responses, and a deep dive on paper 2, looking at questions and advice. In session 4, there will be guidance and support on extended answer questions, and in session 5, any further support. There are two examination components to A-level PE. This pack has been written by the two principal examiners, Ellie Bunston and Colin Maskery. Component 1 is the scientific principles of physical education, and this comprises a 2.5-hour exam and makes up 40% of the qualification with 140 marks. Component 2 is the psychological and social principles of physical education. This is a written exam of 2 hours, making up 30% of the qualification and comprising 100 marks. Units 9P03 and 9P04, the practical and the performance analysis, are not covered by this presentation. During this summer, the grade boundaries were as viewed on this slide. They were taking into account the advanced information and the disruption due to COVID. The next two slides draw focus to the assessment objectives, the AOs, and their importance to candidates. Understanding the AOs and the associated command words is one of the major keys to examination success. There are 3 assessment objectives which determine the quality of the response. AO1 is where we demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the factors that underpin performance and involvement in physical activity and sport. This is where candidates understand their knowledge in isolation. They learn facts. AO2 is where they apply this knowledge and understanding of the factors, its examples and the applied explanations that are given. And AO3 is where candidates analyse and evaluate the factors that underpin performance and involvement in physical activity and sport. And the key determining factor here is their ability to show knowledge and understanding through analysing, evaluating and discussing the points, linking them to AO1 and AO2 knowledge. These slides detail the most used command words and the meaning or intention behind them. Candidates should be familiar with the command words, their demand, and the allied assessment objective. Further detail on the meaning of each command word will be given in future slides. It's worth stressing that in all examination series so far, candidates have lost marks through the incorrect understanding and application of the particular command word. Assessment objectives are driven through these command words. At AO1, candidates will be using their knowledge and understanding of facts, and they would use like classify, give, list, name, state, define, identify, and outline. At AO2, they need to apply this knowledge more to examples. So, for example, a describe question would be an AO2 question. Explain, where they need to give linked points, can be an AO1 or an AO2 question. And then some answers will combine assessment objectives. So, for example, the 8-mark questions might be assess, where they are 4 marks each for AO2 and 3, examine, 4 marks each for AO1 and 3, and justify, AO2 and 4 would have half of those marks each. A summarised question can be AO1, 2 or 3. The extended 15-mark questions would combine assessment objectives. So a discuss question would be AO1 and 3, using those facts and then analysing them, whereas an evaluate or analyse would be application, examples, and analysis, AO2 and AO3. The first area of focus for this paper is a scientific principles paper. Candidates did tend to tackle the majority of the paper with answers that were lengthy enough to gain credit. Some definitions were well learnt. The topic guides and the Inside Track magazine are recommended to support understanding. There were some gaps evident in knowledge, which we'll explore more fully question by question. Generally, candidates use the advanced information well to prepare, but they seem to focus on learning those facts, which is assessment objective 1. If greater focus was placed on application of this understanding, this would improve the quality of those levels-based or extended answers. Levels-based answers often have a context associated with them. Better answers will focus specifically on the given context and the application of understanding. Now going to go through paper 1 question by question. So on question 1, candidates have generally well learnt their definitions. Sometimes equations were used in answers, such as stroke volume times heart rate, rather than writing the definition out in full. Any equation is always acceptable rather than writing the definition out in full sentences, and some candidates did both to be sure of the marks. For explain questions, candidates must make linked points. In this instance, explaining how venous return affects stroke volume and cardiac output. This candidate links that as venous return increases, so stroke volume increases. The second point they make is that as stroke volume and heart rate increase, so too does cardiac output. This scored 2 linked points, and on all explain questions, points need to be linked. Question 3 specifically focuses on why an athlete has bradycardia. It does not ask what bradycardia is. This example makes 4 clear points: hypertrophy, capillarization, increased stroke volume, and the heart not having to work as hard to get the same amount of blood around. This answer scored maximum points. Identifying movements is assessment objective 1, learning facts. And the learning of facts in this instance was well done. Generally, candidates do this well, but there were some errors with spellings on this question, which meant that simple marks were missed. In this question, most candidates knew the definitions of concentric, eccentric, and isometric. However, the errors came when named muscles need to be used and linked to a movement. For example, biceps in the biceps curl would not be good enough because they also needed to state whether that movement was in the upward phase or the downward phase of the lift, because the answer would be different. And the same is true in the squat. Is it the hamstring? Is it the quadricep? Is it in the upward phase? Is it in the downward phase? These would all give different answers. The plank example is quite good, but without, for isometric, but without naming the abdominal muscles, it would not have scored marks. So that all those elements needed to be included. This is a maximum scoring example where the candidate is able to clearly articulate 4 separate points. This area of the specification was well known. A 4-mark question determines that 4 points are needed. Question 7 was very straightforward area and high scoring from candidates. This candidate scored a maximum mark for correctly outlining 4 healthy lifestyle changes. Please note that outlining is not listing, as this required more detail to be added than a simple list. And that's where knowledge of the command words is important. Although candidates had learnt muscular contraction, this is an example where the strongest answers were able to apply the knowledge to the specific context asked. Some candidates just wrote down how a muscle contracted without setting the answer out in the stages as per the question. Some questions will have specific contexts to differentiate between candidates. This is a maximum scoring answer where it's been set out exactly as per the question. Candidates will need to do 2 types of extended answers, either an 8-mark or a 15-mark. 8 markers are assess, AO2 and 3, examine, AO1 and 3, or justify, AO1 and 3. This is an examine question. In this extended answer, this candidate goes into the top band. There is a range of structural adaptation examples included in the answer, which is AO1, and it begins to examine them by starting to explain why those adaptations are useful. So it's doing that AO3, which is analysing. To go even further up the band, greater practical application could have been applied about why this is useful for certain activities, which would gain more of those AO3 marks. In question 10, to score highly, we're looking for a wide range of things that happen in the fast component, but also a link to why they're important, and that's the examination part. This answer scored in the middle band because it doesn't have the range of information or the depth about why this is needed, though it does cover some processes. This question, question 11, has a very specific context to focus on. It focuses on what is the coach doing. Many candidates went wrong on this question because they centered more on the athlete than the strategies a coach can employ. There are lots of good examples in here about substitutions or tactical strategies employed by the coach. The AO3 marks come from analysis, and this candidate is analysing. For example, rolling substitutions will allow energy replenishment time. They're linking why the action is useful and then applying it to the coach. Question 12 demanded a discussion about the cardiovascular and respiratory systems working both individually and in conjunction with each other. In a discussion, there needs to be facts, AO1, but also the analysis about how they work together, AO3. This 3. There was a good understanding of both systems, but the depth of understanding about how they worked and interacted together is not as evident in this response. Strongest answers were able to articulate clearly how the systems work together. As we move to the second half of the paper, all definitions must be learnt off by heart. These come from the specification and the topic guides. In this example, you can see this one has been learnt and the others, you can see one has been learnt and the others have not. Equations can be used rather than worded answers. and these are easy marks to drop on an exam paper. Candidates need to learn equations off by heart, as equations can also give easy answer marks. And equations can also be definitions. Candidates will need to be able to plot graphs accurately. Some lost marks for inaccurate plotting and some for joining points with a line of best fit, which is not correct. Candidates need to remember to bring calculators, pencils and rulers to exams. Units are really important. Sometimes marks have been lost in this question because units were not written down as part of the response. Showing your working out will also ensure marks are not lost because the examiner can see what you are doing. Do not forget to bring calculators to this exam. This candidate has done the first two parts in section C but doesn't know how to divide 0.13 by 26 to get that final answer. In question 15, sometimes marks were lost because candidates wrote a list. Outline and list are separate command words, and outline requires a bit more information. This is an excellent answer which is well set out and scoring maximum marks. This area of the specification was well understood. This is a good example of outlining and is another well set out answer. Sometimes optimal loading and overloading are terms that can be confused. This was a question that also sometimes did not score as candidates listed answers rather than outlining. This test was well known. However, sometimes candidates miss marks because they don't logically run through the whole protocol and sometimes miss saying the obvious information. This response did not contain enough detailed information. This scored 3 marks for the 20-metre course, running in time to a recorded beep, and comparing to a national score. The point about making the cones before the next beep is too vague. With all protocols, the detailed knowledge of it is essential. The definition of plyometrics was not well known at all. All definitions and key terms must be learnt. The answer to part B here is well laid out. This covers a lot of good points in the mark scheme and is easy to read and well set out. This scored 5 out of 6. Good for speed, good for power, little equipment needed and can be adapted for sports, but a high risk of injury. Question 19 was well understood. Answers were generally succinct and clearly set out using the information in the table. Some errors were made with classifications which then meant subsequent marks were not awarded. This example scored maximum marks. So this is an excellent example of analysis being used. It is not simply describing the tests. This answer examines. It talks about the gas analysis being adaptable for running or cycling. It debates how accessible the tests are due to the cost of the methods. It includes the practicalities, such as you can test multiple people at once with the multi-stage fitness test, but it also mentions it's a prediction, so it might be less valid. This is all excellent analysis and AO3 and scored maximum marks. This slide shows the same question, but without the level of examination. It describes the test, but it doesn't go into the level of detail needed for that top band. It doesn't contain the critical examination to reach the top band. It doesn't answer the so what about each test. This example is an excellent answer because it goes into the so what. It tells us about the supplements, but then goes into the application, the AO3, about specifically what it does and then how it applies to performance with multiple supplements. This scored maximum marks. This slide shows us another very good example which goes into the application part of an examination question. In levels-based responses, candidates are assessed and put into bands rather than gaining marks for every point they make. This applies to the 8-mark questions and the 15-mark questions. 15-mark questions can be compare, discuss, evaluate, analyse or suggest, and they're marked against different assessment objectives. This is highlighted earlier in the presentation and in section 2 as well. Compare assesses all 3 assessment objectives equally. Discuss looks at AO1 and AO3. Evaluate looks at AO2 and 3. And analyse looks at 2 and 3. This question is an analysis question, and the AO2 marks come from application to real examples, and the AO3 from evaluating and analysing. They're not just giving facts about what the competition phase is and what the transition phase is, and what meso and macro cycles are. They're applying this knowledge to examples of athletes and the type of work that will be done and why it's useful. So this scored in the top band. The second section of this presentation focuses on component 2, the psychological and social principles of physical education. This section highlights the overall performance of this component, and your attention is drawn to the 4 key points. Candidates failed to fully utilise the advanced noticed information. Candidates did not have as much experience to build on. Candidates failed to complete the paper in the allotted time. And there were no specific differences between the marks in sections A and B. A comparison is made between the marks and grades from 2019 to 2022. The drop in marks allied to grade boundaries reflects the need to address the gap between 2019 and 21 boundaries. These reflect the introduction of advance notice and information to centres to help facilitate the move to 2023 boundaries when a return to pre-COVID grade levels will be made. 2 factors affected the grade boundaries. Compensation across the whole 4 components combined was given for the effects on teaching and learning during this period, coupled with a lower examination performance from this cohort, hence lower grade boundaries for 2022. This slide presents information on additional observations from the exam. The standard of items set and the mark scheme were in keeping with previous series and performed well in terms of candidates being able to complete the paper. Please spend a couple of moments looking at these additional observations. This slide details an explanation of the assessment objectives and highlights the importance that both centre staff and candidates fully understand these and their application to the marks available. As explained in section 1, understanding the assessment objectives is really important. Candidates must understand the command words and their meanings in order to be able to access top band grades. The key strengths and areas to develop are outlined on this slide. The strengths were that knowledge of facts and AO1 was good for many. There was an improved structure on the extended answer responses. There was accurate examples at AO2, and some analysis was being seen in higher mark responses. Areas to develop, we may not have a situation where advanced information is used again, but obviously if it comes out, then it should be utilised at full capacity. We need to include more examples that are up to date and current. Some of the examples were outdated, and more analysis and depth of answer in those extended answer questions, perhaps using on the asterisk-based one, knowledge from across the specification. This paper divides into 2 sections and highlights the demands of the paper. Candidates need both a breadth and depth of knowledge of understanding. So there are 2 sections, A and B. Some questions are points-based, where they're marked on those specific answers. and some are levels-based, where they would need to have that in-depth knowledge. Focusing on the points-based items and then the levels-based assess items will allow centres to understand the paper through the analysis of each of the 17 items from 2022. The first item required candidates to describe Fitz and Posner's 3 stages of learning. This is a well-established PE topic, and the responses examined showed good knowledge and understanding from this examination cohort. The key points are given for look at the strengths of identifying the stages correctly and being able to describe, but also those areas of improvement. Some descriptions lack detail and were generic statements, and there were few incorrect spellings of the stages seen on a few occasions. This response was awarded full marks and demonstrates candidate understanding with accurate and informative descriptions for each of the 3 stages. So item 2 was particularly well answered, with the majority of candidates scoring 3 or 4 marks. The key points are detailed on the slide. Most candidates could identify the 4 types correctly, and there was some confusion on the exact understanding of mechanical or manual guidance. Some outlines included incorrect examples to support their responses. This response demonstrated a full understanding with very clear outline, including examples to support the response. Item 3 was the weakest response on the paper. The majority of candidates did not know this topic, and numerous blank responses were seen. This should be a focus in future teaching. Please note the points on the slide. This exemplar highlights where a response only receives 1 mark. Explanation of Hicks' laws was acceptable, but there was no inclusion of the key terminology of simple and choice reaction time with explanations. Item 5 was well answered, and candidates were able to recall either NAC or NAF performers, and no outline or descriptive detail was required. This item was generally well answered. Most candidates knew at least 1 theory well, and some outlines were very detailed. Any confusions centred on duplication of trait theory or Hollander and Martin's theory. This exemplar demonstrates a good outline of topic knowledge that is concisely explained and identifies 2 different theories. This item was felt to be an opportunity to gain 2 marks rather than lose them. However, not all candidates scored full marks, largely due to vague answers or with no outline detailing the context of the chosen factor. Numerous factors could have been identified. Item 8 asked candidates to identify 2 factors used in Bandura's theory. This was disappointing to see many candidates scoring 1 or 0 on another well-established PE topic. The potential answers were past experiences, vicarious experiences, emotional arousal, and verbal persuasion. Item 10 began Section B and moved to sport and society. This item proved that some confusions exist as to particular eras of sport or physical activity and their dates. Hence, many candidates lost marks by including detail from the incorrect era. Popular responses were transport developments and the impact of industrialisation. Note the exclusion of commercialisation and the formation of national governing bodies. The topic of corporations in sport is proving to be one that many candidates fail to fully understand. Centres are advised to ensure that the common confusions seen on the slide are discussed and the examples of corporations are used to help to understand this topic area. Please view the slide detail. This exemplar highlights an atypical response. Confusions exist in the first part of the response, as corporations do not normally have players and fan bases are passionate. The second point is acceptable in that there may be a lack of chemistry with multinational teams. This item highlighted the overlapping roles of an NGB at the first level of the sporting organisation pyramid, running through to regional or continental governing bodies, and finally to the global world body. Many successful candidates who scored a full 3 marks were able to offer very accurate and specific examples to support their responses. Some confusions were evident. This response gained a full 3 marks. It contains enough descriptive detail to demonstrate the candidate has a good grasp of this particular topic. Please read through this example carefully. This item required candidates to detail a definition, and therefore accuracy was paramount. The exam specification issued 2, pages 86 to 96, detailed definitions, and candidates were advised to become familiar with these. This topic was a well-established and known one at GCE A-level. Item 15 was the last points-based one for this paper and required a summary of the key features of mob games. This item was well answered by candidates on what is a long-established area of study. Where candidates lost marks, this was largely due to a failure to understand the command word, making a list rather than writing in full sentences with an appropriate depth of detail. This slide summarises the key areas of focus for future examinations. However, there is no substitute for a breadth of knowledge on exam topics. However, this series proved that many candidates had a very secure knowledge across the component, if not in depth, but in breadth. The next section focuses on support for the extended answer questions in paper 2. This slide provides an overview of the component paper levels-based extended items. Please spend a couple of moments just digesting. There will be 1 8-mark item and 4 15-mark items. 2 of these will have an asterisk, which means include knowledge and understanding from across the component. Extended responses test the depth of knowledge and understanding of candidates, whilst also requiring some applied breadth for those items marked with an asterisk. Levels-based assessment also examines the quality of sentence construction, grammar, and the ability to construct a reasoned response with analysis, evaluation, and discussion. Reviewing this aspect of the component, clear issues became evident. These are detailed in the bullet points. A depth of knowledge is very important. Answering the specific question that has been asked, applying examples to it, and then being able to analyse and fully use any information given. Item 4 was very well answered by some candidates who showed a deep understanding of the major learning theories and were able to apply these to the specific question. The points detailed on this slide highlight the general analysis. It's worth mentioning for this and all the extended response items, those candidates who failed to score beyond a level 2 often had a lack of depth of knowledge in the topic area or failed to fully answer the question to command word. This clip is a single paragraph as a demonstration of a typical context and explanation. The candidate shows analysis and understanding in discussion on reinforcement. This item was well answered where candidates knew the topic and were able to analyse the value of attribution theory, while a few also offered a critique. some confusions existed between its application to elite and novice performers and those of either high and low level ability. Please view the key points, positives, and areas for development on the slide. This clip shows clear understanding of the use of attribution theory applied to high achievers or elite performers, while the candidate response then extends their analysis through the use of the concept of a self-serving bias. Item 14 was an 8-mark level-based question. This proved a difficult one for candidates to access level 3, 6 to 8 marks. This was largely due to a lack of depth of knowledge, and the slide details the main points of issue. This extract was from a level 2 response. The detail is accurate and the candidate demonstrates an understanding of the topic area. The syntax is acceptable and informs the reader. Please look at the slide. Item 16 was the highest mean mark item on the paper, and some candidates were rewarded with a level 4 or level 5 mark. These candidates fully utilised the data contained in Figure 1 and fully explored factors such as age, race, gender, disability, opportunity, provision, and esteem. Personal experiences may have also helped some candidates in the formulation of their responses. As with all extended responses, a full and detailed conclusion is required, and for a few, one was not evident. This extract, over 2 slides, shows a good evaluation of the issue of gender and sports hall activity participation. Factual detail adds validity to the section. And this is the second part of that response. Item 17 was considered an interesting topic not examined on previous papers. Candidates who could explain and apply the role of ethics were able to then draw from a range of deviances found in sport in their response, and then evaluate said role of ethics to analyse the current sporting landscape. Clearly, arguments could be presented to link a decline in ethical values to a rise in deviancy or vice versa. The mark scheme details a full indicative content for future teaching. Introductions can often be too long, and candidates reveal the main content of their response. This introduction is clear and concise and certainly shows understanding, allowing for the main body of text to then develop. This conclusion is concise but rounds off the body of text exploring and analysing this item. The reader can be confident that the candidate understands this topic area. This slide reviews some key points and acts as a reminder to centres for future teaching. In all extended responses, please ensure candidates know and understand the command word and what that demands of them. Extended responses require depth of knowledge and some breadth, especially on an asterisk question. There is no substitute for knowing topics in depth, develop their understanding, link topics together so they see where they fit in the bigger picture. Practice answering items under examination conditions, timing them, and introduce wider component knowledge so that candidates are prepared. Get candidates to write with the suggested structure. This slide gives an overview to the structure required to access a higher level for extended responses. There is no substitute for candidates having depth of topic knowledge, but writing succinctly allied to answering a specific item command word is what's required. So a suggested structure could be an introduction, then the body of text or the response, showing how many paragraphs, linking points together, writing in a chronological order if that's applicable, use linking words or phrases to show understanding, and then a conclusion. Identify that conclusion for the examiner by saying something like in conclusion or by way of summary, and then the examiner knows that you're gathering all of your thoughts together. The next 2 slides contain some simple but practical teaching suggestions. It's a good idea for candidates to have lots of practice at exam technique and exam-based questions in real time, giving them the right amount of marks for the time available. Perhaps getting students to plan essays collaboratively, maybe in small groups, encourages them to be able to discuss how they would approach different types of assessment objective or command words. Perhaps cutting out paragraphs from different answers and getting them to order them or to create an optimum answer from different ones within the class. Perhaps getting students to answer levels-based questions first so they don't run out of time to complete those questions which carry the higher tariff marks. Peer marking and maybe using the mark schemes they debate and discuss which is a linked point or which points would score which assessment objectives. Colleagues blind marking people's work and then debating and discussing a rank order. Students marking their own work using mark schemes and seeing which levels-based band they think they might fit into. Or students rank ordering work and discussing why they would place one above another. Further suggestions include underlining keywords so that candidates get used to looking at that command word and what's expected of it. For extended responses, encouraging some thinking and planning time first, getting candidates to write a plan for their answer, ensuring they understand the requirements of those different command words, writing their own exam questions using those command words and the specification alongside it, suggesting sentence starters to help them, and perhaps students using their own, creating their own essay questions using that specification and mark schemes. Lastly, this session will look at further support available for the teaching of A-level physical education. There are lots of opportunities for support from Pearson. Please do take the time to read through the topic guides, examiners' reports, Inside Track magazines. There's a lot and support of guidance available in these places, and you can always use that Ask the Examiners service. Finally, please see the Pearson website for additional training opportunities.